Okay, now we're actually gonna get started. Become a paid member. It helps us out. It's $20 for a semester or 35 for the whole year. You get t-shirts, you get put into a raffle to win some stuff. I don't know what stuff. I At least a Raspberry Pi for all I'm aware of. You also become eligible for our mentorship with alumni, and you get a stole for graduation, which is cool if you like the club. So for today's lab environment, yeah, it's all Windows, surprise. Except you'll be running off of a Kali. I forgot to put the Kali IP here. It doesn't matter. These are the three machines that we'll be targeting. There's a domain controller with the IP 192.168.15, a workstation, and an Active Directory certificate services server or certificate authority, whatever you want to call it. That stuff isn't particularly too important. All you need to know is that your scope is essentially going to be the 192.168.10.24 CIDR. And if you need any help with that, just, let me know. Well, these are the targets. When you go on vSphere, the only machine that you should be accessing through console is the Kali machine. All the other machines, like these ones, just ignore them, right? You technically can access them, although it kind of defeats the purpose of the lab if you try to get interactive access, because in a real internal engagement, you probably don't have interactive console access. All the tools that you need to be performing are all the tools for the attacks that you will be performing are all accessible on the Kali machine. They are either located in the op directory or they're directly callable by your path. So you could just call them out by their command name, like let's just say nmap, for example. Just for reference, who actually has a pod set up through Camino right now before we go into this? We have one person, one, two pods set up. It's deploying. What do you mean? It's not, what do you mean? It's not a fake loading bar. What are you talking about? That loading bar is real, man. No, I don't know what you're talking about. I swear it's a real loading, it's a real loading bar. All right. Well, I'll give it a few more minutes for it to didn't expect it to take this much, but that's fine. No, it's just like last year again. Wait, first 30 minutes on infrastructure. At least it's not the first time. Okay. Well, I mean, we're already on the first lab, so I might as well talk about what it is. So you get a little insight into this first of what, like 8 labs before your actual infra spins up. So just for a review, LMNR poisoning. LMNR stands for link local multicast name resolution. So we just call it LMNR because it's too many words. This is essentially a protocol used to resolve names. So because computers, when we talk to computers, ideally we use names because no one's remembering IP addresses. So name resolution protocols just map those names to IP addresses. And the way LMNR works is that when a machine cannot resolve a name, it starts speaking and yelling to everybody else on the network. So all the other machines that are accessible to it on a network level, it's going to start communicating to them and trying to figure out if any of them can resolve the name of the machine that it's attempting to query for whatever reason. So say it's trying to access a website called bruh, and it can't resolve the bruh name. It's going to talk to all the other machines on the network to see if anyone knows what the IP address of bruh is, right? And because of the way this protocol works and how it's enabled by default on, I think, all Windows machines, even now, we can abuse this to harvest credentials. So that's going to be the whole point of this lab. So for this particular lab, I want you guys, well, once your pods are done spinning up, to use the tool responder to try to capture some hashes and then use hashcat to see if you can actually crack those, crack the password that was hashed. And I'll be revealing the solution and explaining what's going on after every single one of these laps. So if you get stuck, don't worry. We're only gonna spend like maybe like 5 to 6 minutes on each of these before I go over and review each of them. Wow, you're right. It's still stuck on 86%. No, it's a real loading bar though, I swear. Wow. These three are in shambles right now. Those of you guys on Zoom are having a little bit of infra issues, because it's a Swift workshop and that always happens. So we're gonna hang tight for a bit. So yeah, if you have any questions with your infra, if something's not working, just feel free to send a message into Zoom chat and I'll take a look into it. Just for reference, how many people right now actually have pods set up and are able to access their callies now? 1, 2, 3, 3. That's crazy. All right, cool. For everybody else, do you guys need help setting your pods up, or are they just taking time to deploy right now? It's a lot of time. Noted. Okay, I think we've spent enough time being stuck on here, so now that my pod is actually spun up, I'm just gonna go over the solution for this particular one, and we're gonna go on to the next one now. Yeah, so the solution for this lab was to just run these two commands, honestly. That's all it took to actually perform this attack. I'm going to actually show how it should look like on my Kali right now. I actually need to give myself screen share first. Cool. Oh. Yeah, it's on. Should take like a second or so, more like 15, 20 seconds. Okay. So as long as the lab is actually working out fine, we should be getting some stuff. It might just take a bit. And there it is. So let me zoom in. Let me zoom in a bit. So you could see all I did, run the responder tag I at ETH0. That's just my network interface that I share with the computers I'm targeting. It's also my only network interface. So all I had to do was run that. Then responder starts listening for those incoming LMNR requests. In this case, there is an LMNR request coming in from the IP address 192.168.110, and the user who's triggering the request is a person named Billy, and the hash is right here. So all we have to do from this point on is, I'm not muted, am I? All right, cool. Yeah, so all I have to do is copy this hash and just run it through hashcat. So let's see. Hashcat is just a tool that cracks hashes. Oh, why is my thing frozen? I need to minimize this. Oh, there it is. It's not ideal to crack a hash in a VM, but it should be pretty quick. While that's running, I'm going to show what was actually going on in the background. So the .10 machine, if you remember from the first slide where I went over the environment, the .10 machine is the workstation WSO1. Is this thing open? Okay. Yeah, it's a Windows XP machine. And it is janky, but the way it's triggering the LMNR request is, wow, my mouse is Getting goofy. Wow, I can't move my mouse right now. All right, well, I guess I can't show how the Elminar request is triggering. Basically, there is a scheduled task running, which is what is this command prompt right now. Well, it's not really a scheduled task, it's more of a startup. And it's trying to make a listing of a SMB share that does not exist. It's trying to list a name that cannot resolve, which is triggering this Elminar request over here. So in this case, the name it's trying to look up is DC, while the actual name of the machine that exists on the network is called DC01. And because the user that this lab is attempting to emulate made a typo and typed DC instead of DC01, and Elminar was enabled, and there was an attacker that was poisoning Elminar, we were able to capture that hash and crack it. In this case, the password just cracks to super complicated password over here. So it's just right over here. So that's all this lab was. Note down that password, by the way, because we're going to be using this user and that particular password for the next lab. So I'll probably just write it down on the whiteboard right now. Just kidding. There's no markers. I lied. Does anyone have any questions for what happened or why it worked the way it did?
For my pen, for my pen, it's still holding on to the butters. That's into. Oh yeah. If you turn the machine on, so it has to be on. All of this stuff be on. Yeah. The machine can't send the request if it's not on.
Yeah, for reference for this lab, all your machines should be online or else the attacks won't work because you can't attack the machine that's turned off. Right. So I got a question that someone was asking me, why did our machine respond to the DC host name? So up here. For reference, let me double check something really quick. So basically the way Elminar works is it resolves names to IP addresses. And when or that's how name resolution works. When a name cannot be resolved, Elminar kicks into effect. And the way this works is it queries all the machines within the accessible network and asks them all to give them the IP address that is associated with the name it's trying to resolve. In this case, one of the machines was querying for the name DC01. That name doesn't exist, so it was unable to resolve it, and it fell back onto Elminar, which resulted in this case the workstation machine or the XP machine to contact all the machines, including the Kali, because Kali's on the internal network along with it, and it was asking all those machines to resolve the IP address of that name. And because it ended up asking us or our Kali, we were able to poison the response and say that that machine is actually us, which ended up coercing authentication from that machine to us, so we were able to capture that hash. Yeah.
How does Kelly know? So we have credentials. How does Kelly know where the credentials belong to?
So this is due to the way the NTLM authentication protocol works. When a person is authenticating over NTLM, they their username gets sent over the network too, which is why this is what the message, well, part of the message looks like. Anyways, is oh, wait, you can't see it because I'm not sharing my screen. But that hash that we captured contains the identity of who initiated that authentication. So that's how we're able to associate that password to a particular username. With that being said, we'll be moving on to this second lab. Let's see. What schedule task? Oh, I mean, we're already in like 47 minutes, and so we'll just move on. So the second lab is SAM and LSA dumping. So as a review, SAM, this is a database that contains it stands for security, something manager, access authority. I forgot already. And LSA is local subsystem authority. The SAM is a database that essentially contains all the local credentials for that particular machine, because remember, in Active Directory has its own users, but Windows, your computer itself, has its own users on it too. For example, my laptop is not joined to a particular domain, but I'm still able to log into it because it has what's called local users on it. The credentials for these users on my laptop are stored in what's called the SAM database. For LSA is where it stores a lot of secrets on the machines. I mean, that's literally what they're called. I do not know all of them, but some of the particular interesting ones for us as attackers are service account credentials and scheduled task credentials. So if you've ever set up a custom service on your machine for whatever reason, or maybe you installed some software, that software sets up a service, right? That's what this screenshot is over here. These services do stuff, right? There's services on your machine. They're running some sort of program, but they have to run it under some sort of identity, right? And that identity has to be provided through a logon. LSA stores the credentials to the logon that service uses. So if it's just using what's called the local system account, that's just a machine, so we don't get anything out of that. But if there's like a custom account, say you're like, from my computer, I have like some Razer hardware and has a driver, and that driver has a service associated with it. So let's say that my Razer driver service is running with an account called Razer service, right? It has to perform a logon to actually do its stuff. And the credentials to that logon will be stored in LSA. So by dumping LSA, we can get the credentials to those service accounts. Same with scheduled tasks. Scheduled tasks, they run stuff on regular intervals. They require a logon to the computer to do that. And the way they get that is through credentials. Those credentials are stored in LSA. So we're going to go ahead and practice dumping those credentials. So using the credentials we got by element R poisoning, we got credentials for the user Billy. So now we combine that with the tool crackmap exec. I want you guys to try and dump SAM and LSA on every machine that we can in this lab environment. And I'll give you guys a few minutes for that because this is also kind of like a small one. That's crazy. By the way, are there any questions? It's a super complicated password, I think. It wasn't actually in RockQ, so I had to like manually append the entry to RockQ into the Kelly. Yeah, I was like, this gotta be in RockQ, and then it wasn't. Yeah, I was like, oh, I'm not gonna go over. I'm not gonna go over like hashcat and masks and rules in this workshop. So I just said, I'm gonna add it to RockQ.
Make your own lists. Just us. Specify.
I mean, I could have, but you know, it's Rocky. It's tradition.
I'll put it in the very end.
Yep. I didn't even put it in the middle. I just straight up put it at the end. Yeah.
Oh.
I had to go through every single class before I went to that one.
Yeah, I mean, that's not. I made the guide yesterday. I was telling that. I didn't know the guy was saying whatever. Yeah, it was in. I don't think I typed that. Yeah. So like, yeah. Yeah. There's like a sign. But there is also. Yeah. But there's also another one. How do you
Wait, what? Wait, am I screen? I'm so confused. Wait,
People like to just.
am I not screen sharing the? Where is?
Yeah.
I thought I was sharing the right thing. My bad, Zoom.
It was before. I don't know why it's not.
Okay. Hopefully Zoom has the right stuff now. Has anyone managed to successfully dump SAM or LSA on any of the machines so far? For those of you who actually do have pods, have any of you guys like, has it worked for any of you guys yet? Yeah. You get output that is useful.
Okay.
Alright, what's up?
I got some part of it. Are those two variables set? U and V? Or which variable? You're specifying two variables, targets and domain. Usually when I hang the dollar sign, right? That indicates that you're using variables. That variable set. When you push it. Yeah, so it's gonna be running the tool on nothing, so that's why you're getting no output right now. You gotta specify a target. You can either use, you can set the variable to have a value, or you can just put the value.
You get successful dump?
Yeah, we're out.
you guys get a successful dump? Nice. All right, one. One is more than none. Okay. All right, I'll be demoing this one now too, so hopefully I learn how to share my screen properly. Okay. So, okay, is my screen sharing? All right, cool. So for this one, all we have to do is run the crack map exec command. We specify the protocol. To perform SAM and LSA dumps, you need to run the SMB protocol through crack map exec. So we just specify SMB as the first argument. Second argument is going to be our targets. I want to target all the machines in this lab. So based on the scope I gave you guys at the start, it's 192.168.1.5, 6, and 10. So I'm going to just run 5 through 10 over here. And I'm going to specify the credentials that we got through Elminar poisoning. So we're going to see how many hits we get with these, with the credentials first before we do anything. It might take a bit. Since I'm running crack map exec for the first time. I'll just call it CME since that's a shorter name for it. Wow, it takes a lot of time on startup. Yeah, what's up? Huh? Because, okay, so it's the way the particular module works to perform the dumps. There's two ways that it can do the dumping, and I'm not confident on which method it uses to dump SAM and LSA. But out of all the other protocols, SMB is the only one that makes sense. I believe it's using RPC, and RPC comes along with SMB. So for most RPC related attacks, for any of these in packet based tooling, you specify the SMB protocol. Okay, actually ran. Cool. So we have 3 hits. So the green indicates to us that as attackers that our credentials work, right? Now, does anyone see the difference between the output I got though? There's one particularly interesting output. Does anyone want to give it give it a guess? Which one? Wow, Palmer, what is it?
One of them says pwn.
That's crazy. Yes. So for reference, and this is particular to the output that CME gives you. If you get a green, that means authentication worked, right? Cool. If you get a pwn, that means that the credentials you supplied have administrative access to that machine. With administrative access, you could do a lot of things, including SAM and LSA dumping. SAM and LSA, they're stored in something called the Windows registry. It's basically this really big configuration that's pretty protected, right? So you need administrative access to dump these two things from the registry. Because it says pwned and we have administrative access, that indicates to us that we have the privileges to perform that dumping. So now all I have to do is do tech-tech-sam and specify that I want to target WSL1, which has an IP of .10. So I'm just going to omit this part. And these are the contents of the SAM database, at least the relevant ones to us. Now, these are more hashes and usernames, so we could go ahead and try to crack them. Although later on in this workshop, I'm gonna basically tell you guys or let you guys know that yes, these are hashes, but to use them, we don't need to crack them because that's just the way Windows works. These hashes are as good as passwords, but that's gonna be for later. Now, what we could go ahead is we could try spraying these credentials across all the other machines, or we could try cracking them and get plain text passwords, but we haven't dumped LSA yet. So let's just dump LSA first before we go ahead and try to do anything more that requires extra work. You can see these are the LSA secrets. There are a bunch of weird numbers. So that's to say, a lot of them aren't super relevant to us, so we can kind of ignore them. Like, I don't know what this thing is. I've never used it before. This is the part that's interesting to us down here. We got account credentials to a service account. And the reason for this is we actually go back to the XP machine and my mouse works. Oh, wow, it's working this time. If I'm able to actually open up my service manager. Anyone actually ever use Windows XP, by the way? This thing is kind of crazy. Basically, if we take a look at the services running on this machine, and I know it's really tiny, so well, actually it's not that bad. But there's a service here called deployment. And this service, it's not even running, right? But what's important is that it exists and it has a logon for an account. And because of that, even though the service isn't running, the fact that it has a logon and it's a service that exists means that the credentials for that logon are going to be stored in the LSA. A lot of environments, corporate environments are like this, where they'll have deprecated services services that aren't in use anymore, but they don't get deleted. So the service accounts, the domain service accounts that were used to log on for that service get left in the LSA. So a lot of the times when you're going to be on an internal engagement, you just start dumping SAM and LSA, you'll find all these artifacts and get additional users that you can use for your horizontal or vertical privilege escalations. And if we wanted to test if these credentials to this service account are still valid, because maybe the service exists, but credentials aren't valid because it's a deprecated service and that account might not exist anymore, or the credentials got updated, we could still use crackmap.exec to test it too. Does anyone want to take a guess as to how we could test if these credentials are going to work? So all we have to do is modify our command. Rather than specifying that the user is Billy, we specify it as this SBC agent account. And the password, we just specify is that plain text password that we see over here. Wow, our machine is lagging. Oh, wow. We have one XP user in the chat. So we got green. Actually, let me spray it across the whole subnet or all our target hosts, not the subnet. As you can see, we get green. So these credentials are still valid for logons. Cool. That's going to take us to our the next lab now. Let me share my screen again here. This next one's going to be a bit loaded. There's a lot of stuff to do in this next lab. Oh yeah, here's the solution. All you have to run is CME, specify SMB, and just you toss that password. Once we find a valid hit, you just specify the SAM and LSA flags, and we can dump the SAM and LSA databases on the respective host. This third lab is going to be, we're going to be going over ACE abuses now. So as a review, an ACE stands for access control entity. It's essentially a permission one object has over another object, right? And because of the way Active Directory is configured, yeah, there's a lot of things with a lot of permissions, and modifying the permission of one thing tends to be inherited by all its children. So you may have a group and you say, oh, let's give this group this permission to do this one thing because I don't know, this IT walkthrough told me to. Well, it turns out that group had another group in it. That group had 3 more groups in it. And now all those people within however many groups that were nested all have that privilege that you just applied for that one top level group. This is called like inheritance or propagation, whatever you want to call it. So oftentimes when it comes to configuring one thing, you end up configuring a bunch of things. This leaves a lot of unintentional misconfigurations and privileges that objects have over each other in Active Directory. And as attackers, this is really convenient for us because this means, wow, it's really easy to just start compromising other objects. So we'll be going over that now. Let's see. I hope the solution's not on the next slide, but yeah, I'm gonna double check this real quick, actually. Gotta make sure the solution isn't in the next slide real quick. Oh, it's not? All right, cool. So, okay. So for this, we're gonna be using multiple tools. I want you guys to give this all a shot. Run the Bloodhound Python tool. This is your data ingester. This is going to query LDAP, which is essentially the information database of Active Directory. All the objects that users, computers, everything, all that exists and is stored in LDAP. And so are the permissions and attributes that these objects have over each other. Bloodhound Python is going to query all that information and just literally just grab all of it. Sometimes it could be gigabytes of information. The tool Bloodhound actually visualizes that information for you. So Bloodhound Python gets you a bunch of JSON. If you know what JSON is, it's a bunch of text and no one wants to read all that. But monkey-like picture, right? I like looking at things. So Bloodhound, we're going to use Bloodhound to visualize that data for us and find those relationships and visualize the paths that we can use to escalate within the domain. Once we actually find the path to abuse, we can use a tool called Bloody AD to just use the ace, essentially. So that's going to be this lab. I'm going to give you guys, I don't know, till 5:17 to try to figure this out, and then I'll go over the solution.
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, the die and the and the old, like, you need to be there. I checked out. Wow. Yeah. It was supposed to be on the west side, so unfortunate.
Is, you know, the mic is hot. Okay, I will be showing the solution for this one now. Yeah, but guess what? We're not halfway through yet.
What?
We haven't even gone to the ADCS part. For reference, during my time at IBM's Express Red team, everything that I'm covering over here is like what they were covering for the other interns. And they covered that over the course of like 3 or 4 days. They also had like a DEF CON workshop on that. So, wise idea. Let's all do this within 2 hours. So that's exactly what we're doing. You can see, cool. All right. So first, I'm gonna spin up the Bloodhound thing. So all you gotta do is run Neo4j console and your Bloodhound tool, because everything's in your op directory. It's gonna be in op Bloodhound 64. And we could spin it up with, since we're doing this as root and it cries if you specify no, if you don't specify this, we're just gonna specify whatever, right? Cool. This thing is in my face. Okay, now we actually need to ingest our data. So specify the Bloodhound Python tool. We could specify any user because within LDAP, nearly every single every user has an extensive amount of read access. What this means is you can literally just view the majority of the objects and the majority of the permissions or the aces that they have. So we could specify any user and just start looking at all of their essentially get a good coverage on the domain. So we have both the credentials for Billy and service deployment. So we could use either of them and we'll get similar output. I actually forgot the password, so I'm gonna need to find it again. A little explanation for these flags. I'm specifying the user that the data ingester is going to authenticate into LDAP with. I'm specifying the password for that user, the domain that it's going to try to connect with, because you need to specify the domain for LDAP, the name server, or basically the DNS server. That's all. You're always going to point that at the domain controller. And I'm going to specify the collection method with the taxi flag. This just means by default, it doesn't collect all the data it can. This is just telling the tool that it's going to collect all the data that it can. This isn't something you always want to be doing because sometimes you can get out of scope by specifying this flag, but because this is a lab where everything is in scope, we can go ahead and full send essentially. Hopefully this works. Oh, so the stuff I did before was I spun up the actual Bloodhound. So, because Bloodhound comes in two different components. There's a visualizer and there's the ingester. On the left over here, I'm spinning up a database called Neo4j because Bloodhound uses that database as its backend, the visualizer. Down here is the visualizer, which is in your op Bloodhound directory. And on the top right, I was running the data ingester to collect data to feed into the Bloodhound program. And it did something. It looks like it finished running. So we're just going to go ahead. To log into Bloodhound, all I have to do is specify the Neo4j username and the password. I think wait, give me a sec. My database is crying. There should be no password because I disabled password authentication for the purpose of this lab. So as with all security practices, we just log in. I mean, you could have specified a password. It wouldn't have mattered anyways. Now, there's no data, so we're not going to see anything. But if I go over to where we ingest our data, here's all of our data down here in a bunch of JSON files. If we were to try to read what it queried manually, like, let's say I try to query the users. I don't want to read this. No one wants to read this, right? This is kind of ugly. So we could just toss in here. And it's going to take some time. This lab is just 3 machines, so this might take like 10 seconds. When I ran this at work, it took 2.5 weeks. So, big difference when you're running this in a lab versus an actual corporate environment. 2 weeks is a long time. The engagement was finished by the time I finished ingesting the data. Like the report was written and we found like 30 or 40 things. Okay, now that we have our data ingested, if we go on this left-hand hamburger tab thing, you'd see it found some stuff. It found, well, I don't know why it's not completely refreshed yet. Program's a little goofy. It says there's 0 users and 8 groups. There's definitely more than 0 users. Now, easiest thing to do is we say the shortest paths to high value targets, but I'm not going to do that. Instead, what we could do first is we could look at the users we compromise. In this case, we compromise the service agent account, right? So we can mark this guy, we could right click him, say let's say this guy is, well, my thing's bugging. Okay. We're going to mark him as owned because we have his credentials. We literally own this user. We have access to him, right? We've compromised it. So now what you could do is we could specify the shortest paths from owned principals, right? So this is going to look at all the escalation paths we can take through LDAP from the users that we have compromised. In this case, we have 1 user we compromise. Well, we could put Billy, but I'm lazy, right? So I'm not going to put Billy, not yet anyways. So here we go. We see this path, right? Is this big enough? Can y'all see it? All right, cool. So we could see this user that we owned has a permission called generic all on this group called IT, right? Does anyone want to guess what generic all means? What is it, Tanai?
Everything.
Yeah, something like that. It's not everything, despite saying everything, but it's enough to be valuable to us. If we wanted, we could right click what this relationship on this graph is called an edge in Bloodhound, because something about graph theory, I'm not a computer science person. Y'all who study graph theory know more about it than me. We just right click and click help, and it tells us the information of what this edge means, right? So what I just said, service agent has generic all on IT, also known as full control. We control the group, right? And this is the cool part. This privilege is going to allow us to manipulate that object, right? And now that object is a group. Groups have people in it and we control it. So that means we could put ourselves into that group. There's various different abuses or like ways to abuse this, right? If you're on Windows, there's the Windows commands using a tool called Power View. On Linux, there's something that I've never used before. We're not going to go ahead and do that because that's not how I'm used to doing it. And that's not how the other people I've seen abuse it. We're going to go ahead and use a tool called Bloody AD. So I don't even remember the flags for this one. So I'm gonna go ahead and guess. So I need to get my credentials. So okay, there's my credentials. So Bloody AD. I'm gonna hope this works. Let's see. So there's my credentials. What do I do from here? D corp.local. Now, since we have all the permissions on a group, I'm gonna try to add us into that group. So I'm gonna say add. Yeah, it says add. I don't remember what to do from here. Add group member. Okay, what next? Yeah, by the way, you'll never remember all the flags and all the arguments for any of these commands. So always taking note of what you ran and what it did, saving it on like, I don't know, Notion, Obsidian, whatever note-taking app you use, is going to be really convenient because I don't do that. So I end up opening the same article about every other week for the past year. And if you just look at my browsing history, it's like the same web page, like every time. So we do add group member, the group, and then the member we wish to add. So to IT, we wish to add ourselves, so service agent. And I don't think I did that properly. Oh, it's the oh, I'm trolling. Yeah, good catch. I forgot, but why did I follow a secure password protocol? Oh, that's crazy. D corp local. To connection handler.
You want that code.
It's, did I not put host? Is there a host flag? Oh, there is. Wow, it doesn't know where the, alright, that's what I forgot, thanks. You also have to specify, what the hell? We have to specify the host of the domain controller's IP or its name. Because by default, this thing will not look for where the domain control is for whatever reason. And the reason why we need, does anyone want to know why we need, or does anyone want to guess why we need to know who where the domain controller is when running this? Is because this tool abuses ACEs. ACEs are properties on objects within LDAP. We're essentially performing write operations on LDAP. Domain controller is the server that's running LDAP on the domain. So if we want to interact with LDAP, we have to interact with the domain controller. Oh, wow, yeah, there we go. So now we're added to the IT group. Cool. What do we do from here? Oh, looks like there's a second ACE. Very nice. Smooth transition into, by the way, this thing says DC sync, which is going to be my transition to this next lab. Oh yeah, there's a solution. DC sync. Does anyone know what a DC sync is, or have you got any of you heard of it before? All right, we're going to be going over a quick primer on the DC sync then. So DC sync, right, stands for domain controller sync or synchronization, right? So you have a domain, right? That domain is centered around a domain controller, which contains which does much of the backend functionality for authentication and management of the domain, right? Now that thing goes down, right? Your domain explodes, your company dies, and all your systems start crying, right? That's not good. So there is a thing called redundancy, right? You're gonna have more than one domain. Or domain controller, right? These are essentially backup domain controllers, right? So you have your primary domain controller and you have backups, right? Now these backups literally exist as backups. When the main one goes down, they come in to serve the functionalities of the domain controller. So then, you know, you're not essentially putting everything on one domain controller. Now, the way they do this is they have to synchronize the information between each other, right? The primary domain controller has all the information. Your backup needs to have that information, or else it's not a backup anymore, right? Because then if that thing dies and the domain has to rely on the backup, but the backup has no domain information, your domain's still dead, right? So they have to constantly sync information and share information between each other. So that's what that's why that functionality exists. Domain controllers need to be able to sync and keep updated records. So, you know, domain stays happy when one dies. Now, as an attacker, if we compromise an object like a backup domain controller, then we can utilize that backup domain controller to do that synchronization and extract the information ourselves. However, in actuality, the capability to perform a DC sync isn't really special. It's not dedicated to just backup domain controllers. There are these three particular ACEs within Active Directory or within LDAP that if an object has those three ACEs, they can perform the DC sync themselves, right? So, and the way it actually works is it uses something called RPC. You could think of it as a weird Windows API. That's not important. What matters to us is if we compromise an object that has the ACEs required to perform a DC sync attack, we could end up just doing the DC sync attack ourselves. What do you guys think happens if we perform a DC sync attack? What do we get out of it? Well, yeah, we're going to get hashes, but basically, right, domain controllers have to sync information on the domain between each other. If we request that synchronization, all that data from the domain, we get all the information on the domain. We literally get all their passwords, all the users, all the data on the domain. It's ours now. This is a very late stage attack because this is how people essentially compromise a whole domain, because once this attack is performed, the attacker has access to every single account on the domain, right? So I don't know, let's say there's 40,000 users on the domain. You can log into any of those 40,000 users now. And once you compromise the domain, you could simply just push out a group policy and deploy ransomware, right? It becomes that easy from this point to, go from, oh, this is just a pen test to, oh, okay, no, it's a threat actor, right? Don't do that, by the way. Don't deploy ransomware on clients. It's just to put this sort of thing into scale. Oh, wow. Someone was saying stuff on Zoom and I wasn't looking. That's crazy. Imitate DC. Yeah, that's basically it. We're imitating domain controller functionality to get all the information. And if you guys remember from like just about like 4 minutes ago, that edge that the IT group had on the domain was DC sync, because members of that IT group can perform the DC sync attack, which leads us to this lab. Perform a DC sync attack now. It should take like, I'm gonna give this like 3 minutes because it's one command. It's one command to pop the whole domain. What? What has no internet? Oh, yeah, it might be using one-to-one NAT and sharing IPs, which causes it to explode, but that shouldn't be a problem. Why do you need internet? You have Bloodhound. It's not an opt. Which Kali are you using? I just said all the tools were an opt, bro, and I said opt like 4 times. Does anyone want to guess what tools you'll be using to perform this attack? That's one. You could use Impacket. There's another one you could use that's basically Impacket. Yeah. It's probably a third one, but like no one's using Windows executables in this lab. You're right. That's not Windows. Got me there. Forgot about the OG.
Oh, yeah.
What's up, Bryce? It was a lot. So on the engagement I was in, where I essentially compromised the domain through like 4 or 5 ace abuses, it started off with the everyone group, where every user, right, every single user in Active Directory had write access to a computer. So that allowed us to compromise that computer. Then that computer had write access to another computer. So we compromised the second computer. That computer then had I had like write DACL on a group. So we wrote a permission into the group and then added ourselves to the group. Then that group had write access to a domain admin. So we compromised a domain admin from there. We literally went from everyone to domain admin because somehow Active Directory was configured like that.
Oh, yeah, so you just need to tag. There you go.
Oh, yeah. The reason, and if this stuff seems like a lot for reference, it is, because this is what real pen testers, internal network testers, or just pen testers in general, this is what these are the techniques, these are the stuff that they use on a daily basis for their engagements. This is stuff that people use, threat actors too, to compromise networks, right? These are actual skills that if you're applying to pen test, if you're applying to like pen test roles or internships, you will be asked on things like this. Like, do you know how this attack works? Do you know how, like, what tools are used to perform it? How would you perform this attack? At what position are you capable of doing this? Like, this is like the actual stuff. With that being said, though, I'm gonna be revealing the solution to this lab. Fun fact, it's one command. But why is it SMB though? Actually, no, that kind of makes sense ish. Yeah. Oh yeah, because RPC. Okay, give me a second. Sharing screen. About it. Right. So remember, the IT group has the DC sync privilege on the domain. This just means that members of this group have that privilege, right? And we just added ourselves in because we had write access to the group. So now we can just perform the attack through the user we already own. So we just do this. Oh wait, I forgot to specify SMB. Go. And we just do NTDS. NTDS stands for like new technology directory services dot directory information tree. It's just the Active Directory database. And we're telling CrackMap exec, hey, we want to dump this thing. And there it is, right? These are, if you notice, this output looks very similar to the SAM database output, because that's just how the tool parses it. But this is information on, this is the users and the password hashes for every single user on the domain, right? Including the machine accounts, because you could log on as a computer too, right? Computer, like I mentioned on Tuesday, computers are just another object in Active Directory that you can log in with, technically. Now that we have all these hashes, where do we go from here, right? I mean, we could crack the hashes, right? I mean, you would think, oh, you have password hashes, crack them and get the people's passwords, right? And that's definitely valid. Sometimes people will crack password hashes on the whole domain to see if the domain is enforcing a secure password policy. Although for this lab, we really don't care about this right now. We don't care about our clients. These clients are fake. So we'll be doing a very rough transition to our next lab, right? Let's see. We're going to be going over something called pasta hash. Is anyone familiar with what the pasta hash is? Have you ever heard of it? Anyone want to take a guess what pasta hash is? Wow, Palmer. Yes, that's exactly what you're using. Because in Active Directory, whereas like any other service, right, you would think, hey, I have a hash. If I want to log into this user, I need to crack it so I can log in with the username and password. Active Directory says, no, you don't need to do that. You don't need to crack the hash. You just use it to log in. So that's what we're gonna do for the lab. Oh yeah, I forgot. Here's the primer on what NTLM is. NT is a hash, LM is a hash. When these two hashes are combined together, we call it NTLM. But NTLM is also an authentication protocol. When you dump the SAM hashes, you get NTLM hashes, but the format is LM:NT. It is as confusing as I was saying it. I remember going over this again. I was like, wow, it really doesn't make any sense, right? You have a hash called NTLM, but that hash is an LM and an NT hash. But NTLM is also an authentication protocol. But when it's used as an authentication protocol, it's referred to as net NTLM. No one gets it. I still don't get it. Is it confusing? I mean, to me it is. I mean, maybe not to you. Maybe you're smarter than me. Probably, right? Anyways, so the way NTLM authentication works is a client, like here, let me get the laser pointer thing out. Client sends an authentication request, right? Their username gets sent to the server they're authenticating to. So if you're logging in locally, you send it to whatever machine, right? If you're logging into the domain, that gets sent or forwarded to the domain controller, right? Then the host is going to send what's called a challenge. You're going to be saying, hey, here's a bunch of random numbers. If you can transform these numbers to an output that I expect, then I know you're that person you're saying. And the way this is done is that challenge, that random set of numbers, the authentication server is sending to you gets encrypted, right? It gets encrypted with the hash of the user's password, right? That NTLM hash, or technically the NT hash. It gets encrypted with that hash, and that response gets sent over. The host is then gonna hash their own output or encrypt their own output and check, do they line up? And if they do, then the host knows, okay, you are that user because you provided the username and you provided the encrypted output based on that hash of the user you are authenticating as. Now, here's the caveat, right? It happens in line 3. The response is based, right? The encrypting of the challenge is based on that hash password, not on the password, on the password being hashed. We have those hashes because we just dumped them. This is why we don't need to crack them, because we just make an authentication request. They send us the challenge, and we just already have the hash that's needed to encrypt the challenge that they sent to us. And then we just respond with it, right? This is why pass the hash exists. You don't need to crack any passwords in Active Directory because funny protocol. And if you're a computer science person or you're a cryptography enthusiast and you're wondering, why don't they use salts? That's an excellent question. I don't know. So using yeah, this is going to take a few minutes, but using crackmap let's try to perform a pass the hash. It's also just one line. So I mean, I might just show the solution right here. Low key. I'll give you guys like a minute or two because it's really similar to what we've already been doing. You just change one flag. Yeah, that's how the authentication protocol works, and because that's how it works, all we have to do is fill up the hash when we try to authenticate. That's all it takes. Instead of a password, we just swap it with the hash. Although it requires a different flag. Oh.
Yeah, the one right now is the phone authentication on the based on the hash that we're doing. So you don't have that. Let me just. So at the beginning, we heard we're gonna perform an attack on 14 and now we have happened where it is authenticate to one machine. We had that. Having access like allows us to go. So once we don't assemble oh, so this is just okay. Program, they're right? For this particular tool, if for some reason, right? It's a developer choice, right? Some people do want to do pretty clear, two and sign, right? It's you just figure out by the yeah, obviously. Right. Yeah. So now we have that actually here, right? This is first half to that storage it's a lot of so this is right. We have this which has you add yourself well, that's about Oh, you're missing one important tab. It's very secure to the cloud. I'll go all through when I go to this password.
Okay. We'll be going over past the hash now. Gonna stop sharing. So here, let me see. All right, so here's the output from my DC sync. Here's all the hashes, right? Now let's take an account I haven't logged in. I don't know Wendell, right? We haven't compromised this Wendell user, so I'm going to perform pass the hash on them, right? Now, normally this whole time I've been supplying the TAC-P or password parameter to CrackMapExec, but we don't have the password for Wendell. We do have their NT hash though. This part, the second part, because it goes LM:NT. So what we could do is we could just copy it. Specify capital H for the NT hash. And we could just hit enter. And our authentication, we still get a green. Because past the hash, right? Windows is like, passwords? Nah. Just use these hashes that we use to secure our passwords, but you can still use them as passwords anyways. A lot of the times when you're doing Active Directory tests, you won't be able to when you compromise users or computers, you won't be able to get their plain text passwords, but that's okay because if you're dumping SAM or LSA and you get these NT hashes, these are just as good as passwords anyways. So like some patterns of engagements will just go, you somehow get access to admin access to one machine, you dump SAM and LSA, you get a bunch of NT hashes, you start spraying those NT hashes and you get a hit on another machine or two other machines. Then you dump SAM and LSA on them and you just keep that pattern. All of a sudden you landed yourself a domain admin account. That stuff happens. It's real. I don't know. That password reuse stuff goes kind of crazy. Now, unfortunately / fortunately for those of you who hated this, I don't think we have time for the remaining parts of our lab. There were 3 more challenges that were all related to ADCS that have gone uncovered. So if you're interested, you can look at them right now. Oh yeah, here's a solution, just one line. But we were gonna go over the various Active Directory certificate service escalations. Escalation 1, 8, which use relaying. It's a lot of words, a lot of commands, and something called shadow credentials, which is sort of reliant on Active Directory certificate services, but not really. If you want to do these on your own, go for it. These slides are on the link tree, and these pods will be available for, I don't know, like another week or so. So if you ever want to come back, review these slides, perform the attacks, do a little Googling and try to figure out the history and why the attack actually works, you can feel free to do so. That's the whole point of this lab. With that being said, though, that should conclude this meeting because if I'm not mistaken, somebody else, we have another club that's going to be using this room in approximately 5 or so minutes. So I'm going to try to get out of here. And unless you want to, I mean, I'm probably going to actually attend their meeting probably. So, you could stay here if you want, but this room will be used. So trying to be respectful of that right now. Do I stop the recording? Tonight's not here. Oh, what? Oh, you're here.